Morning, we have.
Morning, Judith.
How are ya?
I'm good, thanks.
Very good.
Hanging in there.
We like that.
Charlie's okay too.
Hey, was there some kind of air show out of the Santa Paula airport? What is today? Tuesday, so it must have been Sunday.
Not really. I think there was like there was, not exactly an air show, but there was a flyby for the Labor Day parade.
Ah, okay, that's what that was.
That was, that.
Yeah, they turned around over our house.
Oh,
But right in front of us, they turned around. So
or there were some, and then I think there were some Navyons that was the overlay for a week ago Monday there for Labor Day, but I think there were some Navyons that went through too, maybe this Sunday.
yeah,
That's probably what you saw.
yeah, because it was just this past
It
week.
wasn't, they were just doing a flyby.
Yeah, it was in formation. It was cool.
Yeah.
Are you flying a lot or not at all?
I'm flying a bit. I just flew the Tiger with Diane the other day. The Gypsy Moth is down not because we can't fly it, but because our hand propper just had gallbladder surgery and it's recovered. So
that would answer it.
But yeah. I am putting the Tiger Moth back on the market. If anybody wants an antique biplane, tell them to call me.
Will it park in my garage?
Probably not. The Gypsy might because the wings fold, but the Tiger doesn't.
Gosh, you caught me like a week too late. I just bought one, like.
Keys.
Beginning of September, I just got it. Dang. I was could have done that. I'm joking, Rosemary. Didn't happen.
I know you are.
Rosemary,
You're so far away, Mark.
I know I have to play with the screen a little bit. We're gonna play with the screen a little bit today. So yeah, this is our last class of the year, which is I guess this is a fortuitous what? Yeah, this last class of this class of Tuesday classes. And I guess this is a good one to finish with. I don't know. I will tell you this class today that we're going to be studying, and I already posted this up on YouTube, on Facebook. This one, we are cautioned not to study it in the wrong frame of mind, and definitely we're supposed to be careful how and when and who we study this with. So I don't know what to tell you. I'm trying to look at who's on already, and yeah, it's.
Should I excuse myself? I don't want to upset.
I think it's pretty safe. But I will tell you that
What did they think would happen to you?
well, miracles, things like that, but also could be dangerous stuff. As I will show you, here's I'll show you one of them. I'll show you one of the, I gotta share the screen here. Still letting some people in. There's Floyd. Yeah, I'll show you from the Talmud we read that says specifically about studying this. It says It says right here, for example, at one point they were talking about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was talking with Rabbi Elazar and said, got off your donkey, started walking while we were discussing the divine chariot, and a fire descended from heaven and encircled all the trees in the field, and all the trees began reciting song. Here's another example. Rabbi Yoshua is walking on the way with Rabbi Yossi, and they said, we too shall expand on the design of the divine chariot. And Rabbi Yoshua began expounding, and that was the day of the summer solstice. Well, a couple months ago. There are no clouds in the sky, yet the heavens became filled with clouds. There was an appearance of a kind of rainbow in a cloud, and the ministering angels gathered and came to listen, like people gathering and coming to see the rejoicing of a bridegroom and bride. So, this is the kind of stuff that happens when we study this. Well, I wouldn't say we're going to study it in depth today, but we are going to study it. And we're talking about today the first chapter of Ezekiel, the way Ezekiel begins. And what this is called in Jewish mysticism is the Merkava, the chariot, the divine chariot. So, well, let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about Ezekiel. So the first thing we have to kind of say is what is mysticism? What is Jewish mysticism? What is any kind of mysticism? And most people would say it's the attempt to try to understand God, try to be one with God, try to connect with God at the highest level that we can as human beings. Well, for us in Judaism, the mystical texts that we know of, like the things that we talk about as part of Kabbalah, which is like the biggest part of Jewish mysticism, which really goes back to the Middle Ages. The basis for most forms of mysticism, or at least the earliest forms of mysticism we have, are discussions about what we're reading about right now, which is the Merkava, the chariot. We call it the chariot, but part of that study is also, it overlaps, is something we call the Heichal, which is the palace, the divine palace. And those things are kind of studied together, which are kind of the abode of God and heaven, and discussions about what how to meditate or how to take oneself into that realm. That's Merkavan and Chechalot literature. The other area of Jewish mysticism that's kind of like the basis for mysticism is what we call Maaseh Vreshit, studies on creation. And those kinds of studies are also mystical and also not, I wouldn't say forbidden, but definitely sanctioned or warned against. And those two areas, Maaseh Bereshit, studies of creation and what comes before creation and how God created, and the study of the Merkava and the Hechalot, those are the two main areas of mystical study that exist before Kabbalah, before the Zohar, before the Middle Ages. It goes all the way back, obviously, to the basis in the Torah, but we start seeing texts discussing this in the Talmud, in the Mishnaic period, in the Midrash. We already see discussions of it. We also see it in the Apocrypha, which was written around the same time. Those texts that were not necessarily kept by Jewish, by the rabbis, but were written by Jews. Those discussions, and they're found in like the book of Enoch and the Jubilees, those discussions are the earliest forms of Jewish mysticism that we have. And so it goes back to both creation story, Genesis chapter 1, and Ezekiel chapter 1. So as we get into this study today, and again, that is the, that is kind of my little yes.
Before we get going, why? Who? What is the, for lack of a better word, what's the genesis of trying to not discuss it? What's the, why?
Why do you think? Why do you think? It's a good question. So we have the mic out here today so that hopefully people who get picked up a little bit, but yeah, why do you think?
Because we might hear something we don't want to hear.
In the sense that, like, what do you mean?
And there were dinosaurs.
Well, you mean people will see stuff that they'll be presented with information that they can't process, right?
Or they refuse to process.
Yeah,
I think it's dangerous
yeah, why?
because to delve too closely to God and those secrets is not for us.
Why?
And it could,
Well, it may not be for us, meaning people who are not protected from, well, what are we being protected from? The biggest cautionary tale, we're going to look at it after we look at the actual text. We're going to look at the most famous cautionary tale from the Talmud, midrashic element of the Talmud, but whatever. The biggest worry from the Jewish standpoint isn't that you're going to, though it is there, that it'll cause you to think things that are not good, right? That is there. Well, it's all there. But the biggest concern really is that it will hurt you. It will drive you crazy, or it'll drive you outside of you'll not be able to be part of the world anymore. It'll drive you into a frame of mind where that's all you'll think about. It'll make you nuts. Or again, it'll take you outside of the community so that you can't be part of the community anymore. So there is 100%, it's 100% here, I'll just show you one little thing. And again, this is just an easy place to show it. Prohibitions against study. The Talmudic interdictions against concerning Mekrabas speculation are numerous and widely held. They were limited only to the most worthy sages. The dangers they talk about. It must be studied only by exemplary studies. Maaseh Bereshit must not be explained before two or expounded, and Maaseh Merkavah before one, unless he's wise and understands it. So, but Maaseh Bereshit is the study of creation, and Maaseh Merkavah is what we're about to do. So they caution both. I guess you could say by what they just said, that this is the most dangerous. The Merkabah is the most dangerous. They're very scared about people learning this or learning a little bit of it, and then,
You know what scares me the most?
what?
Blind faith.
Well, I agree that that's. I agree. That's that.
Court on.
Look, there is definitely a understanding, and again, we'll look at this. I'm going to show you the most famous one in a second, but let me show you this one. Why, again, an example talking about Ezekiel. Here's the most famous line. The sages thought an incident occurred involving a youth who was reading the book of Ezekiel in the house of his teacher, and he was able to comprehend the electrum, which is the Hashmal, which we're about to read. And a fire came out of the electrum and burned him, and they sought to suppress the book of Ezekiel due to the danger it posed. Hananiah ben Hizkiah said to them, if this youth happened to be wise, are all people wise enough to understand this book? That's in the Talmud. I'm just telling you, this is in the Talmud. Now, so I just told you, this is in the Talmud. So people study the Talmud, you know that this is what, this is what people study when they're in yeshiva, and you see pictures. You see pictures like this from Israel. This is let me show you. This is what you see these these pictures. Seen these pictures? This is thousands of kids in Israel studying yeshiva. Right? They're in the yeshiva. They're all studying there. Are these kids studying this right now? Absolutely not. They are not studying this. No one is. This is not what they're studying. They are studying Jewish law, and they are not studying what we're studying right now. Doesn't mean they never study, but that's not what they're studying there. These people are studying Jewish law, and it's pissing off a lot of Israelis because they're paying for this. But
Because the people.
yes,
Well,
Judith?
But Mark, they're studying Jewish law, but they're not studying the Torah the same we do, or the Tanakh, correct?
Yes, correct. How many people need to study these laws that nobody follows?
I don't disagree with that.
And even if they did follow it, where are they following it? Only in their own community.
Right.
So Israel law is not based on that. Israeli law is not based on that. Israeli law, when it comes to Jewish law, has one basic principle, which they're arguing about now, and it's part of the discussions that the Supreme Court is dealing with now. Whether or not you can go to the movie theater on Shabbat. You do not need to study those books to understand that question. If you want to know whether a bus should be able to drive through your community on Shabbos, you don't need to study those books. I'm just telling you, anybody understands that. And again, that's not a discussion for me. That's a discussion for the people who live in Israel. But those people don't need to study those books to answer that question. That's all I'm telling you. So how many people need to study that? I don't know. But I can tell you one thing, the people of Israel shouldn't have to pay for it. So that is the that's what I
Ezekiel is written in first person.
well, let's take a look at it.
First chapter is supposed to be the most.
Let's take a look at it. So let's get to it. Okay. So I kind of gave you a little prelim of what we're studying from the standpoint of Ezekiel. Let's say this too. We know virtually nothing about Ezekiel. You're going to see what we know about Ezekiel. We learned a lot about Jeremiah. There is no prophet that we're going to learn more about than Jeremiah. Jeremiah, Jeremiah, as you saw, is a lot of narrative. A lot of those pages are narrative. Ezekiel does not have a lot of narrative. The first 24 chapters or so of Ezekiel are essentially his prophecies when he's in the well, we'll see what happens while he's in Babylonia. And the next section is kind of his prophecies against the other nations. And then his last chapters are kind of prophecies of hope and fulfillment and what's going to happen to the Jewish people in the future. The two most famous parts of Ezekiel are what we're about to read right now, chapter 1, which is famous, especially amongst Jews, especially amongst those who study mysticism. But the most famous chapter, as we're going to read it at the very end, is chapter 37, the Valley of the Dry Bones. That is the most famous part of Ezekiel, and that's the most quoted, and that's the one that Ezekiel's most well known for, is the vision of the Valley of the Dry Bones, which arguably sets up in fundamental beliefs in Christianity to the extent that it's arguable that even though Isaiah talks the most about, a Messiah and like people look at Isaiah as being a book that foretells Jesus, the reality is from a theological standpoint, from the belief system of like, well, what do Christians believe? Ezekiel probably is the most important from the standpoint of kind of outlining the concept of resurrection. And also those chapters also kind of set the stage for the book of Revelations, which I wouldn't say is the most important book of Christianity, but it is one of the texts that Christians look at for understanding, how did Christianity develop. So those we'll find in Ezekiel. You'll also find some of that in Daniel, but this book is the earliest. And Daniel itself was probably written maybe 100 years, 150 years before the Christian Bible. So it's not really that much, even that much older. This book was written hundreds of years before. We don't think it was written necessarily by Ezekiel himself, but we also don't think that it's necessarily there is disagreement over this, but I think most scholars believe that Ezekiel was written by one person, compiled by one person, or again, the product of one person. Not like Isaiah, where we say that there's 2 or 3 different Isaiahs that we can identify. Here, probably written by one person or copy down the prophecies of Ezekiel. And I will tell you what we do know about him. He was a Jewish exile. He was taken with the Jews that were taken out of Judea. He was taken with King Jeconiah. He was taken with him in that exile, one of the many exiles, but one of the exiles. He's taken into Babylonia with thousands of others of Judeans. He is also, like Jeremiah, a priest. He was a contemporary of Jeremiah, a little younger. Some people think that Jeremiah, well, let me rephrase that. There was a midrash that Jeremiah was his father. There's absolutely no reason to believe that, other than the rabbis in the midrash wanted us to kind of have something about Ezekiel, because we have nothing about him. We know his father's name is Buzi. We know he is a priest, and we know he was taken into exile, and he lived in Babylonia. Other than that, we don't know anything about him. The book doesn't say anything else about him. I mean, there's like little tidbits of like how he does what he does, but it's pretty silent about him. So it's much different from that way than Jeremiah, than the last book. And it is very different from the standpoint of the previous books that we read, because even though Jeremiah talked about the Babylonian exile, this dude lived it. He was there. He was, from the beginning of this book, in exile. Why is that important? Well, it tells us that God talks to the Jewish people outside the land of Israel. Now, we know that God talked to Moses in Egypt. Okay, so that's not like the first time we've heard it, but it's the first time that we've ever had on a kind of like a basis of being able to say, well, this isn't Moses. We know now that God will be with us in exile. And it's very important from that standpoint that
So then God is not a national God.
yeah. And this is a very important thing, that God will guide us and talk to us and be with us in Babylonia, in the Mesopotamian area. That's a significant thing, because that means there's a God who doesn't just talk to us from the temple. When Isaiah talks to God and gets visions, he's doing it in the temple. When Jeremiah is getting visions from God, he's in Israel. Not yet. Yeah. Oh, if they hadn't? Yeah.
And you go into exile,
Yeah.
there still be a temple and you can still be around.
That's an interesting question, right? So I just bought a book that I'm reading through. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but it's a fantasy compendium. It's called Alternative Covenants. And it's little alternative histories of what would have happened to the Jews if they didn't leave, if they weren't exiled. And there's actually one where they're trying to leave Egypt, but it's today. And that's the one I read the other day. And it's like, they still live in Egypt. They haven't left. They've tried to leave. Every time they think they can get out, something goes wrong. And they're still living there. And Egypt has been ruled by the Romans, and they're still in Egypt. It's that's just one of the stories. But yeah, that's an interesting, what if they hadn't? Yeah.
It's like the man behind the us.
Why? Because
Talking about creation is gonna drive me crazy. That'll drive you nuts.
yeah, but people love alternative histories. Why? I don't know. Man in the High Castle they had several seasons of that. So look, the issue is, can we want to wrap our heads around this, because you say, well, so what's the purpose? Well, first of all, it's entertaining. But the other thing is that it gives us this question of like, what are those things that are important to us or that have changed our lives? And then like we wrap our heads around that, and what would the world be like otherwise? I do it. It's an important question. I'll give you this is the most, I think, the biggest one, right? What if Christianity never became a separate religion, right? What if Christianity never became a separate religion?
Where everyone would be a rabbi.
Yes, but more importantly, would there be a world? Because the world would have probably been under Roman type style of whatever, and then something else would have replaced it, but nothing would have been able to.
But that's like saying if our immigration policy was different in the.
No.
30s,
This is,
cancer would be cured.
but what would the world be like? So you have to ask that question, because here's the fundamental like reason, like why does it even matter, right? Because this is the question. Here's why it's relevant, actually, not just a mind exercise. As a Jew, can we understand Christianity in a way that we can value and see that it's important and contributed to history, without saying, oh, but it's responsible for the Inquisition and it's responsible for the Crusades, and it was partly responsible for the Holocaust, because all of that anti-Semitism that's been indoctrinated for 1,000 years in Europe finally found an outlet? Because that's the narrative, right? That's part of the narrative. I didn't write that narrative. Go to the Holocaust Museum in Israel, and that's the narrative. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it drives you crazy. Because if you can't come to terms with Christianity, then it'll drive you crazy. And quite frankly, it'll make you an angry person. And I know people who are angry people. And they sublimate it or whatever they say. But I don't say that. I say, look, Christianity helped civilize the world. Is it worth all those bad things to us? That's why the question's important. Because that's where you actually play it out and say, I gotta say, Judaism was probably not equipped to spread ethical monotheism to the rest of the world. So if it wasn't, then we needed Christianity to give that. And that's how I
There's certainly
understand it.
Christian thought that Jesus' intention was never to create another religion.
Yeah. Bless you. Yeah. So whatever his intention was, whatever Paul's intention was, however it played out the way it did. I run the thought experiment, and I think that of what the world would have been like if it hadn't been for Christianity, I don't know we could have gotten to this point without it. And the alternatives in my mind look pretty bad. Oh, a world that the Romans and then all that kind of methodology of how to govern without compassion, without like a basic idea of ideas that are in the Torah that Christianity gave to the world. It's kind of scary. I don't think we get to America. I don't think we get to this country, which has fallen apart, but that's a thought for another discussion at some point, but let's hope that it doesn't. But I don't think we get to that point without Christianity softening the Romans. I don't know. I mean, that's my feeling. That's the way I come to terms with it. So let's take a look at Ezekiel. And again, our goal today is just to open this up and not to blow people's minds. But feel free to interrupt when you get to a point where you need to have a question answered. We will, I promise, come back to this. Well, what do we take away from this? Why we have to be careful. All right. So Rosemary, if you'd start off with the beginning of Ezekiel.
In the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles by the Chavar Canal, the heavens opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, the word of God came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, by the Chavar Canal in the land of the Chaldeans, and the hand of God came upon him there.
So What is that? Why is that in parentheses? Because it appears that an editor inserted that there. The book may be opened with this discussion, with this opening, with this comment, whatever, in the 30th year. And if you look at the note, it says, we don't know of the 30th year of what? The 30th year of his life? Is it the 30th year since something happened? We don't know. So the editor, it's in the Bible itself, is this, it happens to be the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. So maybe he's 30 years old. He was 25 when he was taken into exile. And this is when this happens. Other people say maybe it's the 30th year since King Josiah was killed in battle, which would have been a little bit later. And maybe that comment is not quite right. Look, all we know is if it wasn't for this insertion, we wouldn't even know who Ezekiel's father was. It says his name is Boozy. Now, Boozy doesn't mean he was a boozer. That's his name. He was not boozy. So some people say that that's a description of his, not that his name was Boozy, but that his father, and again, the Midrash was that Boozy was actually a nickname for Jeremiah, the one who was, in this case, a booze meaning degraded or hated by his community, which is what we know Jeremiah was. We don't know. But we also know that he's a Kohen, he's a priest, just like Jeremiah, just like Isaiah. We know that these priests were also occasionally prophets. Not every one of them, not every prophet was a priest, and not every priest was a prophet, but there were some who were. And as a matter of fact, the big three all were, both priest and prophet. So they were from that house of Aaron. They were part of that family. We also, it's repeated that he is in Chebar Canal. That's the area that he's in. And it's in the land of the Chaldeans. And that's all we know, right? He's on the, Chebar is one of the tributaries, one of the canals built off of the Euphrates River. Okay. That's all we know about him so far. And let me give you a little secret. It's about all we'll ever know about Ezekiel. We're not sure where he died or where he's buried exactly. There are 2 places in Iraq today that are, one in Iraq and one in Turkey that we think there are, or that according to tradition are places that he's buried. He is revered by Christians. He is also revered by Muslims. And so people would go to his tomb and pray, but we're not even really sure where he's buried. But the assumption is he's not buried in Israel. He's buried in the exile, in exile. All right. So here's a little narrative, parenthetical insertion. And here we go. Here's his vision.
I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance, and in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. In the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings. However, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg, and the feet of each were like a single calf's hoof, and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on 4 sides. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left. And each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Such were their faces. As for their wings, they were separated. Above, each had 2 touching those of the others, while the other 2 covered its body. and each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, without turning when they moved. Such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire. Dashing to and fro among the creatures was something that looked like flares. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the four-faced creatures.
Okay, so before we get back into the Merkavah too much, let's talk about the angels themselves. So people already asked, am I going to show this picture? And I am. So this picture was done by Sarah Renson when she was studying with us before she went to rabbinical school. She painted this picture, which I can't zoom in anymore. I'm sorry, from where we are. But these are pictures. This is her artistic rendition of the angels. So what she did is tried to paint what she was reading literally. So the angels have four wings. They have faces. And she represented each one of them has four faces. So each of them have four faces, but she represented so that one or two of the faces were seen on each of the angels. And she also has the legs of them, which it says they were fused together like one leg, so that they come down like one hoof, right? Which is the way she shows it. Now, she also put the wheels behind it, which we're about to get into the discussion of the wheels. So I'm going to put this off to the side for people who want to take a look at this while we're discussing. Oh, what? Hebrew translated on what?
What's it say?
At the very top it says Shaddai, which is the name, one of the names for God. And then in the middle it says Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Meloho Haaretz Kevodo, Baruch Kevodo Raimim Komo, which is the line from Isaiah. So it's actually a combination of two things. And I'm going to put it up for the people who are watching at home. I'm going to leave this up here for you to.
Put that back on the wall.
I don't know. We have kind of, we did, but now we only have our two Talit tote are on the walls. Look, there's definitely, there's the angels there too. So just a comment about the picture or about what she's trying to do is she wanted to try to bring this into existence, try to show what she's reading here. The description of these composite angels that are composite beings, that in itself is very typical of the ancient Near East. So the Babylonians had similar visions of composite entities. So this is nothing very different from what we also see described in Babylonian texts. Look, Sarah decided to put the line from Isaiah, which is what Isaiah says when he sees the angels in his vision, and which is Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot. The whole world is filled with God's glory. There's an interesting midrash about this because the rabbis ask a question. Why does Ezekiel describe this, whereas Isaiah doesn't describe that? If Isaiah sees God's throne and God's presence, why doesn't he describe that? Why doesn't he say that? They saw the same. I mean, it's God. Why would Isaiah not go into that description? And the Midrash tells us that the reason is that Isaiah regularly would have these kind of visions. He was in the temple. He was in the Beit HaMikdash regularly. He was a priest. He was around this kind of stuff. Ezekiel wasn't. And when someone doesn't normally see this kind of stuff, it freaks them out and they describe it because they're so astounded by it that they have to go into a description about it. Isaiah didn't because he was familiar with it. So it's not that they saw anything different. It's just for Ezekiel, it was a mind-blowing experience because he never would see that because he's living in Babylonia. So this is why this vision is so important. Now, it's clearly called a Merkavah, a chariot, because it's not in the temple. It's not in a place. It's showing that God can go from place to place. This is not God. This is what God is carried on. This is a movable throne, which is why when we talk about Merkavah mysticism, and we also say it's part of the Hachalot, which is the palace mysticism, where God exists, how God is housed, if you will, that is a study. That is something that people meditate on. That is something that people envision. They talk about it. They write about it. They discuss it. They use it as a meditative experience. I think that's probably the most important, is they meditate on it. But this is the chariot. This is a description of the chariot. This is a description first of the angels that are part of the chariot. And now we're going to get more into the chariot itself. Yeah,
Ezekiel is not in prison this time.
no, he's in exile. He's in exile. He's living around the same time as Jeremiah. This has happened. So he's seeing this. And again, what is it telling people? God is with you in exile.
So he's out on the plain, wherever he is.
Yeah.
He's all by himself.
Yeah. This is, well, it's going to describe it a little bit.
He's Joshua.
He's a little Joshua tree. He's in Sedona. So he's now going to describe what this looks like. So this is not God. This is what God rides on. This is how God's transported. Interestingly, by the way, the word Merkavah means chariot, right? It's used as a war chariot. In the Bible, the word Merkavot is used to describe what the Philistines had, what the Egyptians had. We didn't have a lot of chariots until King Solomon. Eventually we get chariots. Chariots are important because it's like the difference between having an army and having a bunch of soldiers running around, as a militia. As an army has chariots. God has a chariot. What's interesting, Israel today has tanks, right? The tank is called the Merkavah. That's the word that they used in Israel. I mean, it's a biblical word. It's not like but understand that there's something strange about that from the standpoint of, again, there's not a lot of words in Hebrew, but the Merkavah is the Israeli version of the Abrams tank that Israel got. And if you watch the Golda movie, that's what they got from America at that time, was starting to get those tanks. It's very strange that that's the word that we use for a tank in Israel today. But let's look at these wheels, which are, that's the word that's used in Ophan. Ophanim is the plural. These are the wheels. So let's look at this, because these are not normal kinds of wheels. And they're in the picture too. All right.
As for the appearance and structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl. All four had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of two wheels cutting through each other. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its four quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all four were covered all over with eyes. And when the creatures moved forward, the wheels moved at their sides. And when the creatures were borne above the earth, the wheels were borne too. Wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went, wherever the Spirit impelled them. And the wheels were borne alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. When those moved, these moved. And when those stood still, these stood still. And when those were born above the earth, the wheels were born alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels.
These are the Ophanim. Again, these are the ways that the throne moved was through the wheels. The wheels clearly don't move like normal wheels. And they also were born above the earth, which means they were not rolling on the ground, which means they were hovering.
Above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse, with an awe-inspiring gleam as of crystal was spread above their heads. Under the expanse, each had one pair of wings extended towards those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body. When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings, like the sound of mighty waters, like the sound of Shaddai, a tumult like the din of an army. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. From above the expanse over their heads came a sound. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. Above the expanse over their heads was the semblance of a throne in appearance like sapphire, and on top, upon this semblance of a throne, there was the semblance of a human form.
Now, this is the first time that we're now getting into where God is, because everything that has been described up until now has been a description of the throne itself. The way that this movable throne chariot thing is moving or can be moved. The descriptions that are used throughout are not descriptions of normal colors. They're not descriptions of the words that are used here are not words that we would normally, even in the Bible, use to describe colors. These are words used to describe, well, you can see, jewels. These are not colors from the standpoint of we normally say, well, this is the way this color looks. This is red, this is blue, this is green. These are colors that exist, at least the way they're described, they exist in jewels, which means they take on different colors depending on the lighting, depending on what kind of energies being thrown at them, how hot they are. All of these things are all part of these descriptions, because again, when we hear the word sapphire, which is sapphire, that's by the way, the word sapphire comes from the Hebrew, Arabic, Semitic word. Sapphire is a Middle Eastern word, sapphire. That's not a normal color. That's not blue. I mean, generally we think of sapphires as blue, but not every sapphire is blue, and not every time we look at the same sapphire does it look the same exact color. It depends on how light it is, and these are not normal colors descriptions. Okay, and it says not it's sapphire, it is like sapphire. The words that are used here over and over again are mar'eh, which means like, it looks like, which is why they translate it as appearance. It appears like. It doesn't say it is. It didn't say it's blue. It says it's like this. It also uses the word demut, which is appearance, which is different than saying this is what it was. Demut means it looks like it. The best word I can use to describe it is this, which is why they use the word semblance. It's probably pretty similar to what your translation has, right, Mary? Likeness, yeah. Reverend Lynn, what does yours say? Appearance, yeah. So this isn't, it is this. It looks like this. Another way I would describe it, if we were using today's languages, and the best way I could describe it is, it looked like this, which is, I never really saw anything like this, but if I was using this word, it looked like this, because we don't normally use these words in biblical Hebrew of saying it looked like this. That means it wasn't that, but it looked like it. That's what I'm going to tell you. There's also sounds. So this isn't just a visual experience. There's something happening where he hears sounds. He also, it says right here, like the sound of Shaddai, which is, you see, the Almighty. Now, she has it right there in the middle, because something he heard sounded like God or sounded like Shaddai, which is why it's written out on there, because how else do you describe it? That was the best way she could say it. And then it is like a army, sound of an army. So now we're starting to get into where God is. And we're going to get into some colors here and descriptions, which are very strange.
How many years after Moses was there?
600 years. 600 years. That's a long time. No?
It's a long time, but I'm just saying, right? God showed himself then.
Correct. But this seems to be an even, well, this isn't Moses. This guy knows he's not Moses. And he knows he's seeing God not in the land of Israel, where again, Moses didn't see God in the land of Israel either. The one place that Moses never saw God, because Moses never went to Israel, was Israel. He never saw him. So God did definitely appear outside of Israel. We already knew that. But the issue, and Moses and God even talks to, Adam and Eve outside of Israel, and talks to Noah outside of Israel, and talks to Abraham outside of Israel. So God can talk to people outside of the land of Israel. But here God is appearing to an average ordinary priest / prophet, or maybe now he's a prophet. This is how he starts to be a prophet. And this is not something we've ever had before. We've never had this description of God. And so, well, let's take a look, because these colors and these things are not normally, again, what happens or what we would normally see. Okay.
From what appeared as the loins up, I saw a gleam as of amber, what looked like a fire encased in a frame. And from what appeared as the loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was a surrounding radiance. Like the appearance of the bow that shines in the clouds on a day of rain, such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of God. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking.
So that is his description of what the divine presence looked like. That's what he said it looked like. It looks like this. It looks like that. It looks like the semblance of something, the appearance of something. It looks like a rainbow. It looks like this word that we don't know how to translate, hashmal, which they translate as a gleam of amber. What is your, I know yours, Mary's probably going to say electrum, right? What does Mary say?
Brightness rounded out.
It doesn't say, I saw a gleam of something? No? They didn't translate hashmal at all. John, what does yours say?
It's the same. Mine is Old English. It's the same as the.
So from what appeared as the loins up, I saw a, what does it say? I saw.
The loins upward, and from the appearance of the loins even downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about.
Yeah.
The appearance of the bow. But
So they're translating hashmal over and over again as essentially fire.
why is, I've read this coming in.
Yeah.
We discussed
Yeah.
last week. And I said, okay, I need to, study a little bit, a little bit outside it.
Yep.
So I want to know why this is any more driving craziness than anything else that we've been reading for the last 2 years.
Because this is the only experience of somebody telling you what God looks like. So why do people care? Well, because people want to see God. And if I want to see God, what am I looking for? What can I? So here's,
Can I relate?
so here, yeah. So here's what I do. I think about what I'm looking for. So if God looks like Hashmal, which we don't really know what that means, if I can look for that, or if I see that, am I seeing God? So therefore, like, with the assumption that you want to see God, right? That's the assumption always, is that people want to see God. If I can see God, what am I looking for? So is it there all the time and then I'm just not seeing it? And if I can see it, then I've seen God. And that's, again, if I want to. Look, I showed you that text from the Talmud. It says the kid was talking about Hashmal and he got burned up. Now,
But Moses saw God and he.
yeah. Yes, so it's a dangerous thing to do.
It looks like Ezekiel did.
So
Hopefully I
What?
won't burn up.
yeah, why is Ezekiel able to describe this
Right.
and not
no.
burn? Well, we're about to get into this because right now Ezekiel knows that what he's seen is pretty powerful, because it says, I flung myself down on my face. Right.
But it's a reflection. It's not God, it's a reflection of God.
So whatever he's seen, right? Whatever he's seen is not exactly God. But it's clearly something special. So God has allowed Ezekiel to see him.
To a mirror.
Whatever this experience is.
It's like, isn't it, it's like the caves, the shadow of the caves. That you don't see the things itself, you see the shadow.
So if Ezekiel sees what he sees, or however he sees it, he knows what he's seeing is special because he throws himself down on the ground and is scared by it. Are we supposed to try to see this? Well, there's definitely warnings about doing this. And
You can't just see it.
what do you mean?
You can't just see it, right? It has to be presented to you.
Correct. So can you get to a point? Can you work yourself to a point to see this? So the Hechalot literature, the literature for the last, really to some extent for the last 2,000 years, as Jews have tried to do this, what they've tried to do is they've tried to teach, they've in a cautionary way, tried to teach people to be able to get to this stage so that they can do what Ezekiel did.
I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole, but I'm reading this book. I showed it to you. It's taking forever to get through it. But Maimonides, right? He says you shouldn't even get to this point.
Correct.
You
So
don't want to get to this point.
correct. So because
No.
but Maimonides was a rationalist. Maimonides was a rationalist and wanted people to live in this world.
Yes.
There are people who don't, they aspire to connect with God, and that's what they want to do.
His point is,
Yes, he's a rationalist telling people not to do that. Yes, he doesn't want people to do that. Yeah, so he's trying to get people not to do this. So, but there's always an impulse that exists in the world of people who want to do this.
Well, saying it's too mystical and dangerous to understand lets the rabbis off the hook on trying to explain it.
Yeah, but Rosemary, in all fairness, if you're gonna direct people to do this type of stuff, what are you actually creating? You're creating a society where communing with God. Look, there are people who do this today, right? And generally speaking, when we hear about people who've, you saw the Leonard Cohen movie. Leonard Cohen went up to a monastery by Mount Baldy and lived there on and off for 6 years, 7 years to try to do this. I mean, he had enough money. He did what he already had done. He left his family, he left everything behind and went up and did that. I mean, that's just one guy. There's a lot of people who've done it. There are people who, look, you can make the argument, John. It's the people who can afford to do that. Well, maybe, but also it's a luxury to some people. Some people would say it's a luxury to be able to do that. It's a luxury to be able to say, I'm dropping out of society and I want to try to search for God, wherever it is.
Which makes it a very private affair.
Yes.
It makes it a very private affair. It also makes it a very selective affair of people who have the resources, who have parents who have the resources to do this.
But you're saying those are specific spaces you have to go where they are in the world. You can do it at home every 2 hours.
Correct, but most people would tell you that the only way to really do this is to have all your other stuff to be away from all of the other stuff. So you've got to be outside of society in order to do it. Judaism has always cautioned against it, and that's why Maimonides, as a proponent for rationalism, told people don't do this. Judaism, for the most part, told people they can't do this. The only way you could do it is if you already started a family and already took care of your business. So it really didn't want people to do this. It's always going to be there. The proclivity and the desire for people to do this kind of speculation is always going to be there. The argument is Ezekiel didn't ask for it. Ezekiel doesn't go off into the mountains and say, hey, God, will you please speak to me? Ezekiel is walking down the street, assumedly, and this happens to him.
But he tells us about it. So it's not just a private experience. It's one that's available secondhand, but available to the community.
One would make the argument, though, that what Ezekiel did, if he did anything, was he told Jews that God is still with them and God is still communicating with us and God is going to, in the exile, continue to guide us. And that's why it's here. I don't think it's in the Bible because, I don't know for sure, but I don't think it's in the Bible because an editor in the Bible said, hey, let's tell people that Jews have mystical experiences and we're going to recount one to you so that you know that Jews have mystical experiences. I really don't believe, I know I just said it in a demeaning way, but I don't think I don't think a biblical editor did that for that reason. I'm going to tell you something else. The rabbis actually specifically say in the Talmud that there was discussion about whether to include Ezekiel in the Bible because of this, because they were afraid that people would take this text and do exactly what people have done with it, which is use it as a way to meditate and to eventually even take themselves out of the community. So the rabbis actually discussed why this book should not have been in the Bible.
Is it, Mark, so the book is then almost more closely related to Kabbalah?
But even before that, to the Apocrypha, to the books that the rabbis didn't want us to study, they suppressed those books. And this book, by the time that they couldn't suppress it because Ezekiel was already part of the Bible. Look, there is a discussion of whether Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, should be in the Bible. And they said, yes, it should be. Was it too much about love and romance and sex, and should it be in the Bible? They said, yeah, it is. Rabbi Akiva says, yes, it should be in the Bible, definitely, because it's so beautiful. It's about our relationship with God. Well, look, they also had the discussion about Ezekiel, and they said this is a problem because they knew that people would look at this and say, oh, I got to just study this and I got to just figure this out. And I got to figure out how to do what Ezekiel did. So they were worried about it.
Rabbi, when we started this today, you mentioned
The priest spent 400 years saying you got to worship in Jerusalem. That's the only place where God is going to hear you. And now they have to walk that back.
Well, yeah, well, that's also going to be an issue because people can do this in their backyard. Yeah, John,
You
yours,
were reading this book about alternative.
yeah, histories.
Well, so they were doing this 3,000 years ago.
What do you mean?
Because what they were thinking, you have to keep these guardrails, these rules are the guardrails of life, right? And if people think there are no guardrails, right? So now they're trying to determine what's going to be part of those guardrails. No, I mean,
So,
the point is to get into deep discussion about this. And so way back when, you know, before the Romans, right, things were getting, we read it, things, the craziness was crazy, some of the stuff that was going on.
so,
These are the guardrails.
well, I'm going to show you the guardrails. So this is a guardrail. This is the Talmud. So this is 2,000 years ago. This kid got burned up talking about this. Now I'm going to give you the most famous guardrail. Before we get into what Ezekiel's told. What?
Laws,
So as people don't go off the edge.
freeway, you don't.
I understand that, but
Here's the discussion, by the way. Here's the explanation I shared with you. Rava said, oh, so here's the question, right? Let me see right here. What's the difference between what Isaiah saw and what Ezekiel saw? So here's the discussion. Here, it just really starts here. Rava said, so again, this is from 1,500 years ago. All that Ezekiel saw, Isaiah saw, but the latter did not find it necessary to describe his vision in such detail. So what may Ezekiel be compared to? A villager who saw the king and is excited by all. And again, this is the explanation of it. To a villager who sees the king, the bold is what's actually in the Talmud, right? A person who's a villager who sees the king freaks out when he sees the king. He describes all the cool things that the king has. What does Isaiah compare? To a city dweller who saw the king, right? Why? Because he sees the king all the time. He's not freaked out by what the king says. He sees the king all the time. He sees all this kind of cool stuff the king has. So he doesn't go crazy about it. Ezekiel does because he's a villager, right? Right. So that's the explanation. This next one is talking about the animals. Not anything much there. That's there. But let me get to, again, this is just all Talmudic discussion. But let's get to the so this is all discussion of the Merkava, of the chariot. But let's take a look at here. So let's get into this most famous. This is the most famous Agadah. This is the most famous legend of mystical speculation. Here we go. And some of you have read this before, but I'm going to share it with you. This is all part of the same stuff. I read to you this part about the trees when they were discussing it this one time. This is all about the discussion of the divine chariot. You know, people are describing this, and here's the line right here. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. This is the famous scene. One of the most famous scenes in the Talmud. Four entered the orchard, Pardes, or paradise. Right? And they are as follows: Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, who was also known as Elisha ben Avuya, that's his nickname, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the senior among them, said to them, when you arrive in the upper world, which doesn't say, but when you arrive, you reach pure marble stones. Do not say mine. Don't say water. Although they appear to be water, because it is stated, he who speaks falsehood shall not be established before my eyes, which is a line from Psalms, right? So when you get up into heaven, you're going to see what looks like water. Don't call it water. Don't call it water, because you're going to get punished if you say it. Right? Here's what happens. Ben Azai glimpsed at the divine presence and died. And with regard to him, the verse says, precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his pious ones. Another line from Psalms. They're going to use proof texts, right? That's what the Talmud does. It quotes parts of the Bible. Don't get so hung up on that. Ben Zoma glimpsed at the divine presence and was harmed, i.e. he lost his mind. And with regard to him, the verse states, have you found honey? Eat as much as is sufficient to you, lest you become full from it and vomit it. A line from Proverbs. Again, one goes crazy. One dies, one goes crazy. And then Acher chopped down the shoots of saplings. In other words, he became a heretic. Rabbi Akiva came out safe. So the rest of this stuff is not, it's not about that. It ends there. This is and again, this is the way that the Talmud is. This is literally 2 sections, 2 verses. Arguably, again, the most famous part of the Talmud. I don't mean like about God. I'm talking about this is one of the most famous scenes because it's all about the guardrails. It's all about keeping people from going off the deep end. 4 people study these texts together. They go to heaven in a mystical way. They transfer themselves in the presence of God. Of the 4, only one of them comes out okay. And he's the most famous guy, Rabbi Akiva, the greatest rabbi of his generation. He's the only one who can handle it. All the other three, 75% get damaged or die. How do you read that and not be scared? That's the purpose of that story. It is to stop people from doing what we're not going to do, but which is go down the rabbit hole of Ezekiel. How do you stop people from doing that? By writing this story 2,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago, that this is what happens when you study these texts. You go crazy, you die, or you become a heretic.
Honey, what's that?
Honey, it's sweet, right? But if you have too much of it, you get sick. He got sick. He went mentally ill.
25%.
You like those odds? You like those odds? No, you don't like those odds. Come on. If you think about it rationally, none of those things sound fantastic. Other than, again, if you come out of it. And of course, Rabbi Akiva came out of it. But you know what happens to Rabbi Akiva? His flesh gets torn off of his living body by the Romans. Not because of this, but because he continues to study Torah, teach Torah. But it's not like he wound up with such a great ending as well. But he doesn't get punished for this. But the point is that you got to be Rabbi Akiva to come out b'shalom. That's what it says. Rabbi Akiva yatsa b'shalom. That is literally, you think you're a Rabbi Akiva, then do it. But you're most likely not Rabbi Akiva. He's closest thing to Jesus that we have in the Mishnaic period. He's the rabbi who gets martyred, who teaches Torah, who is compassionate to people, who didn't start studying Torah until he's in his 40s. He's a common guy who married, according to the Midrash, he marries a wealthy woman whose father disowns her because she married beneath her. And eventually, the father-in-law has to eat crow and recognize that his son-in-law became so well regarded. All of these stories about Rabbi Akiva are wonderful stories. But this story is part of his legend, and it's fairly scary because all of his friends don't make it out. So
Almost say that like about any kind of conspiracy theory could do that to you.
true. That's true. Really, one of the most interesting ones is this guy, is Acher. To me, he's one of the most interesting because he becomes a heretic. So the question is, what kind of heretic did he? What happened to him? So he's to me, he's the most interesting dude because he didn't die. He didn't go crazy. He just went rogue. We're not really sure. He became the other. They don't even call him by his name anymore. They have to call him the other, which is pretty scary, right? Look at that guy right there. He's Anakin Skywalker in his Star Wars shirt. No, he is. Maybe he becomes Darth Vader, right?
I'm gonna tell you what this is doing to me.
What?
What is the nature of reality? What is real and what is not real? And you go insane trying to contemplate them.
Yep.
Before the Dead Sea Scrolls, what was the first person support for Torah?
What was the? I don't
Blind
think,
faith?
yeah, John, I don't think they asked that question. I mean, that was not a question that they asked. You're asking a question from a modern standpoint. They didn't.
What's the question?
What was the evidence for the Torah? Like, what was the evidence for the historicity or what's the basis for it? I guess you could say, I guess you could say the oral traditions that people had, you know, that people said, oh yeah, that happened. We know that happened. This is what my great grandfather told me. So yeah, these are interesting folks. And what there's whole books that have been written, you know, even modern books have been written about these people, not so much about Ben Azai and Ben Zoma, because one died and one went crazy, but Acher, there are books that have been written about him, because what happens to him and how he becomes different after this. You know, look, some people say he became a Christian. Some people say he became a Roman. You know, he started following Roman philosophy. Some people say he just became an atheist. You know, there's so much speculation of what happens to him. But what happens to him when he comes in contact with God is not what you think would happen, which is that he become more religious or that he become better at being a rabbi. The experience didn't give him what you'd think it would give him, or what his colleagues should aspire to. So if 25% of coming in contact with God, you have a 25% chance of going rogue, that also isn't good. And it also tells you, don't think that if you do it, it's going to work out. Don't think that doing this is going to make you a better Jew, if you will. Don't think that this is going to bring you into closer connection with our tradition by doing this, because you got a 25% chance of going dark to the dark side, or becoming the other. Whatever it isn't good. You know, did he become a witch? Did he become? We don't even know. Like, the stories about him are so strange that, I mean, they're compelling. I love the stories, but because they're interesting stories, because it opens up this whole question of, like, when you know these kind of things, when you're privy to all these stories, right, and to all this information, can you ever, you can't be a normal person again, right? You know, there's no, you know, you can't put this back in.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
if that's the case, if that's the argument for Ezekiel 1, right? Then why during high holidays we have kadosh, kadosh, kadosh? Why, in other words, if they say don't get close to it because it'll drive you crazy, then what's the point of getting on our tiptoes?
Because here's where your limit is. So it's a great question. John's saying, what's the purpose of trying to get close to God if this is what? Because where Judaism kind of takes us to is that if we get well, first of all, we shouldn't need to do this. That's one of the things to take away too, by the way, is that we should be comfortable enough in our belief in God that we don't need to speculate, that we don't need to meditate too much, but that we should have enough in this world that we don't have to do that. But it is this idea that most of us need to go through life, take care of our business, and that's not our business. Our business is not to get any higher than kadosh, 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 pointing to that. So look, it's a great question. Like, what are the limits to how much we're supposed to be doing this? So here's Elisha Ben Abuya. I just want to show you one thing about him, because I find him interesting. So he's called Acher, and it's as little as known about him. Here's what it says. Let me just get this out of the way. Elisha was a student of Greek, as the Talmud expresses. Acher's tongue was never tired of singing Greek songs. which of course was, the Romans study Greek. So, whoa, let me get that out of here. But Elisha ben Abuya is, it says, what did Elisha see, right? What did Elisha see? So it says right here that Elisha, why is this not going away? No, I can't get it out. Elisha, what did Elisha see? Gotta move this over. I'm trying to get everybody in here to see it. He sees, so it says in there that he cut the saplings. That was the text that it said. It said he cut the saplings. It says when he was in heaven, he saw Metatron had been given authority to sit while he records the merits of Israel. I don't know why I can't get this part out. Well, maybe we're not supposed to see this. No, it's on Wikipedia. So he sees God seated before, he sees Metatron seated before God. And because he saw that, he thought maybe there are two supreme powers. They brought him to Metatron and they smote him with 60 bands of fire. They said to Metatron, when you saw him, why did you not stand up before him? The authority granted to Metatron, and a heavenly voice was heard, repent, O backsliding children, except for Acher. So what he saw there was that he saw Metatron. He thinks, oh, Metatron's like God. They had to whip Metatron in front of him so that Acher wouldn't think Metatron was equal to God. And so there is a voice that's heard in heaven that says, everyone can repent except for Acher. So Acher then feels like he can never find teshuvah. He can never find acceptance or repentance. So the takeaway from it essentially is, if Acher hadn't been in heaven, he wouldn't have seen this thing, which freaked him out. And then the head angel, Metatron, has to be whipped in front of him, which freaks him out and pisses off the angels that Acher made that happen, because Metatron shouldn't have. By the way, Metatron was just played by Derek Jacobi in Omens. Did you see that, Rosemary, by the way?
Oh, yeah.
You see the new season?
I
No.
saw it and I read the books. Wonderful book.
It's Pratchett's book. It's
Yeah. I'm a Pratchett fan.
Neil Gaiman. No. It's funny. It's
a very funny book.
It's Omens. Not Omens. It's not
Good Omens.
Good Omens. It's about an angel and a demon. It's very good. It's on you'd like it, Reverend. It's on Prime, Amazon. It's on Prime. It's very good, very biblical. Good Omens, and it's David Tennant, it's very British. Let me put it this way: it's very British. It's Tennant and who's the other guy? Shear, Michael Shear. Michael Sheen. Yeah, Michael Sheen. Yeah, that's the guy. So they're they're an angel and a demon, and they work together. They're friends. Anyways, but it's got a great cast, and God, the voice of God is Francis McDormand. So that tells you what's going on in this. So, anyways, Metatron is Derek Jacobi. In the last episodes, they introduced him. Anyways, Metatron is described. Obviously, Metatron's a Greek word, by the way, but he's like the other big angel in heaven. Which again is why maybe people said Elisha ben Abuya became Christian, because he sees two powers in heaven. It's a little hard to say that, but we do know, again, he's mentioned a few times, maybe again, what was his heterodox, what was his, why did he become how did he become a heretic? Maybe he was a Gnostic. Maybe he became a Sadducee, right? Which means he doesn't believe in heaven anymore, which would be weird because he went to heaven, or, doesn't believe that we go to heaven after we die, right? Maybe he became an Epicurus, which is, again, maybe a form of Greek philosophy. Again, there have been a couple plays about him. This book by Milton Steinberg called As a Driven Leaf, which was a great book that came out, as you can see, about 80 years ago now. It's about the rabbis during that time. And yeah, a couple other people have written some fiction about Elisha ben Abuya. It's just an amazing, he's an amazing, to me, kind of like a guy, a cautionary tale, but some, again, there are some discussions of what really created his apostasy. Maybe, again, it was stuff that happened before he went to the orchard. There is another story that Elisha saw the detached tongue of Rabbi Chutzpit, the interpreter, one of the 10 martyrs, being dragged through the streets. After his being murdered, he exclaimed in shock, "Should a mouth which produced such pearls of Torah now lick the dust?" So he saw one of his colleagues after he was torn apart by the Romans, and he thought to himself, how can God let that happen? How can, correct, but that drove him away. He couldn't handle that. So yeah, he's an interesting guy. But again, a little bit off the topic, but these are the 4 guys who went into Pardes. So we got to talk about it because, again, this is why we try to make sure we don't go off the rails. So we didn't even get into what God actually says to him, which, again, let's take a look at what God said to Ezekiel, which we'll start now in chapter 2. But that is chapter 1, which is, like I said, studied by people over and over and over and over again, for glimpses of God. So here's what God actually says to him at this meeting.
And it said to me, "O mortal, stand up on your feet, that I may speak to you." As it spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me upon my feet, and I heard what was being spoken to me.
So, by the way, that's also interesting because not only does God tell him to get up on his feet, but the way he describes it is a ruach, a spirit, came into him and stood him up. He wasn't getting up, but the spirit lifts him up and stands him up. That's pretty mystical. That's pretty powerful. That's not just like the vision. Something happened to his body as this is happening. It's pretty interesting. And people sometimes forget that happens too.
God said to me, "O mortal, I am sending you to the people of Israel, that nation of rebels who have rebelled against me. They, as well as their ancestors, have defied me to this very day. For the descendants are brazen of face and stubborn of heart. I send you to them, and you shall say to them, 'Thus said the sovereign God,' whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious breed, that they may know that there was a prophet among them."
So he says to him right off the bat, people don't listen to me. Their ancestors didn't listen to me. They don't listen to me, but I'm going to send you to them so that they know that there's a prophet amongst them. And of course, very importantly, that there is a prophet amongst them, even in exile, right? So here's it, that's really important. God, we already said it, God is with them in exile, and God is even sending a prophet to them while they're in exile. Now, here is I think maybe one of the most important lines, if not the most important line about prophecy we ever have, about any prophet. Let's read this.
"And you, mortal, do not fear them, and do not fear their words, though thistles and thorns press against you, and you sit upon scorpions. Do not be afraid of their words, and do not be dismayed by them, though they are a rebellious breed. But speak my words to them, whether they listen or not, for they are rebellious. And you, mortal, heed what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious breed. Open your mouth and eat what I am giving you."
Now, this is what is the nature of prophecy, which is that the people are not going to listen to you. Don't be dismayed for what they're going to do to you. But this is the important thing. You're a mortal like them. And this is what prophets do that God can't do. When you ask yourself, why doesn't God just speak to us directly? Right? Why would God use a prophet? It's for this very reason, which is maybe they'll listen to one of their own. If I tell you something as God, you'll say, oh yeah, that's God. God can do that. I can't do that. But if another human being tells me this is what I'm supposed to do, then I say, well, that's a human being. I'm a human being and I can do it. Now, this is super important. And again, one could make the argument, this is the best description of prophecy. What's also used here too, over and over again, which you probably didn't get in the translation here, because they did a very good, I mean, this is a legitimate word. Mortal is a very good word, right? Mortal, because God isn't mortal, but we're mortal. But what does your translation have, Mary?
Son of man. And in two places, son is capitalized.
What does yours have, Reverend Lynn?
Son of man.
Yeah. And you know where I'm going with this.
Oh, yeah.
This is what Jesus was called. Right? So Ben Adam, that phrase, Ben Adam, son of man, is super important because that is what a person is. A Ben Adam. It is a person, is literally the son of Adam, the first human, mortal, whatever you want to say, whatever the word is. But this word, son of man, is used throughout Gospels and descriptions of Jesus to describe him. And when it's used, it's capitalized, as Mary just said. It's capitalized. So in a Christian Bible, when that phrase, son of man, comes out, there are whole books written about this in Christianity. There's whole theological discussions about whether son of man really means a human being, or does it actually mean somebody who is not like a normal son of man. Is it a description that's in line with biblical prophecies, or when Jesus is described as a son of man, is it meant to almost be ironic or facetious? This is the question that, again, is opened up by these descriptions that we have in the book of Ezekiel. And again, you could argue this is the most important part of prophets, which is that people are going to hate you. Thistles and thorns will press against you. Hello. That's the crown of thorns. I mean, this is exactly what happens. Scorpions are what this word right here, akarabim, that's what the Romans called their whip, was a scorpion. This is what is in people's minds when they talk about what Jesus was as a fulfillment of what the prophets were supposed to be, which are human representatives, because God can't speak to us like God. God needs to have human beings talk like human beings.
If in one of the alternative possibilities, had Christianity not become a separate religion, but sort of infused itself into Judaism, and the canon would not have been closed, would Jesus just, you think, perhaps be another
Prophet? Well, it's difficult to say, because that whole discussion of what was Christian book, what was Apocrypha, what was going on during the time when people knew that Jesus,
The church had already been established by then.
so Rabbi Akiva lived 135. According to the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva was part of those discussions of what's going to be canonized. So he knew he knew about Jesus's followers. And again, it's only 135, so it's only 100 years later. But he knew what these people were doing. He knew what these people were saying. He knew what they were reading. Well, we don't know how familiar he was with it, but let's assume these are friends of his. Let's assume even maybe some of his followers were worshiping with Christians. We don't really know, but you could make the argument that discussion infused the discussion of what was going to be canonized or not. So I mean, we don't know. We don't know how much, yeah, and we don't know how much of Christian theology was understood by the rabbis, or what you could even call it Christian theology. But were books that were favored by Christians, this is the question. We don't know. Were the books that were favored by Christians in some cases not canonized because of that, because they were already partial to those books? I think it's difficult to make that argument, because I just don't think that factored into it. I don't think that weighed on them. But there are people who say, well, why wouldn't it have? If they knew about it and they knew that early Christians were reading the book of Jubilees. But I don't know, like, the fact that the Essenes, that the Qumran community were reading those books could have been enough to make the rabbis not include them. I don't know if if there were more Essenes than there were Christians at the time, maybe that was a bigger factor than whether Christians read it or not. So I don't know. I don't know that we're missing, we definitely don't have that discussion. But I don't think that the Christian Bible, I don't think the Christian stories would have made it in, because more than anything, they were too new. They were too new.
And they wouldn't have been needed.
They might not have been needed, but they were also too new. And they were too, like, nobody can, like, it's an interesting question. How long does something need to be around long? How long does something have to be classic, right? How can a song be classic rock if it's only 10 years old? It's got to be 30 years old. I mean, at what point does something become classic, right? So how much time needs to pass for something to be classic? You could have made the argument that if there was a part of if Jesus's teachings would have been kept, I mean, you can't, if Jesus's teachings have been kept for 200 years already around his story, maybe, but I'm not sure that there's anything in there that would have been that different from what had already been said, that people would have said, we got to keep this as a separate book. That's the other question. Is there anything in there that people would have said, oh, well, now he said that, and now we better include that because that's different from what somebody already had said. I don't know. I'm not sure that there was anything in there that people would have said, yeah, but God didn't say that before.
I'm ashamed to admit that I did not know that the symbolism for the four gospels of the evangelists is from Ezekiel. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't get into that. I didn't get into that too much, but yes, the symbols of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are based on the images that are on the Ophanim. So if you look at I'll show it up. If you look at
That's 1,000 years
what?
or 700 years.
Yeah. John, the issue is, look, you're named after one of them. So am I. So here's the thing.
So
What? So no, people have used there's the symbols right here for the gospels. So these are, yeah, these are the symbols of the different gospel writers, the St. Matthew, St. Luke, St. Mark, and St. Mark and St. John is the eagle. So there's a
Jesus is in the middle of the
Yep.
lamb.
Yep, and there's the lamb. So these are the symbols that you'll see, and they're the symbols from this. So
why is there a Nazi German cross right there?
no, that's just that just happens to be the symbol. It's one of the crosses. It's a symbol. It's one of the ways that people would make a cross. So you'll see these in different church iconography. You'll see them represented. If they say, hey, look, we want to show you, if we want to show you Mark, we're going to show you this, we'll show you the symbol, and you go, oh yeah, there's the, and people would go by those symbols. Oh, you're representing that. I always liked it to, I'm not going to get into it. What?
So if Reverend Lynn did, then you're.
But a lot of Christians don't understand.
Does that mean they never get to Ezekiel, or they don't?
No, they just don't make the connection. Look, there's look, a lot of people don't know that there's different symbols for the different gospel writers. I mean, you're talking about something that already, you're already talking about something that people, a lot of people don't know.
Branch of Christianity finds it
It's-
interesting or important.
It's not, not every Christian knows about that. Since it's been brought up, I mean, I happen to love iconography.
Love the line.
Yes, I love the lion, and that is, and nobody knew that, it's not like well, here's one of the more famous ones. This is the one in Piazza San Marco in Venice. So that's one of the lions. So anyways, you brought up something that is mystical in a way for me, which is the
When my
lion.
son
It's my
Andrew
symbol.
Was maybe about, well, I guess when he went to kindergarten, he was learning to read, and he read winged,
Mhm.
and the teacher said, no, it's winged. He said, not at church.
Yeah, it's winged. It's a wing. And now I'm gonna smite you.
Right.
Why are you giving me a hard time? You shall be smote. I will smote you with a mighty smiting. That's what we do in our house. So no, that's awesome. Winged creatures. No, I happen to love this stuff. So that happens to be, I go down a rabbit hole of imagery and stuff like that. But it's the
It's
mystical.
more fun than real life.
Correct. Fantasy. It's why I love whatever. It's why I love Game of Thrones, whatever So, people get, and you get, you don't want to go too far, but this is historic. I mean, as Reverend Lynn said, I mean, this is actually like, there's imagery that you'll see and you'll be like, why is that there? Well, that's why Mark has a lion. Anyways. So, Ben Adam, to be the son of man, which is technically what we all are, sons and daughters of man, of Adam. So here's what we're supposed to eat, by the way. Open your mouth and eat what I'm giving you. We want to finish with a little breakfast here. Here you go. Here's your breakfast.
As I looked, there was a hand stretched out to me, holding a written scroll. God unrolled it before me, and it was inscribed on both the front and the back. On it were written lamentations, dirges, and woes. God said to me, "Mortal, eat what is offered you. Eat this scroll and go speak to the house of Israel." So I opened my mouth, and I was given this scroll to eat, as I was told. "Mortal, feed your stomach and fill your belly with this scroll that I give you." I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey to me.
Now, you asked about honey, right? You asked about honey. So clearly honey is connected to connections to God, to taking in God's word. Milk and honey is part of our, exactly. Devash is our land.
Is where we get eat your words.
I don't think eating your words.
And to comment on that, why did it take so long for double-sided printing?
What did he say? For double-sided what?
Double-sided, he wants to know double-sided, it was double-sided printing. But yes, it is not easy on a scroll to write on both sides. But you do conserve paper, but it is not easy. And it obviously smudges one side when you're flipping it over. So it's not easy to do you don't do it unless you absolutely have to. This is a scroll that's being eaten, so it can be written on both sides. But yeah, generally speaking, you don't write on both sides of a scroll, because one side will be, as it's rolled, the ink will come off of it.
Rabbi,
So yes,
lamentation,
yes,
mourning,
yes.
and woe.
yes.
Mourning and woe, those are sad things.
Yeah, kinim, they're all bad. They're all bad. Kinim, Hega, and he. Those are not good things. Those are all bad.
Those negative things are sweet as honey.
Yeah, that he eats them and they're sweet. Yeah, and this is the prophecies, right? These are the prophecies he's giving them, which they're not good. become part of him, right? And so this vision that he has, it's a vision. He hears things, he sees things, he tastes things. This is a complete, experiential moment for him. He's moved. He actually is levitated in this experience too. I mean, this is a full experience. It's not just something he sees, according to this. Again, is this whole thing a vision? Is this whole thing, including this experience of eating, is this also a vision, right? Because, is this something that he's, all of this is a vision? Is all of this something that he's seen, or is it something that he's actually experiencing? The rabbis are in differing opinions on whether this actually happened. Did he actually eat the scroll? Or did he imagine that he was eating the scroll? All of these things, again, for the more rationalists, this is all a vision. This is not something that he really can be doing, because the Bible actually says that God is only going to speak to people in visions. He's not going to speak to them out of a burning bush. He's not going to do these kinds of things with them where they levitate people and stuff like that. If he's imagining this, if this is going on in his head, then the whole experience is a dream, which is, for the rabbis especially, is okay, especially the more rational people. That's okay if this is a vision. But if he's actually experiencing this, if he's actually doing this, then that's something that opens up the possibility that this happens to other people. Now, when it happens, again, it's happening 600 BC. It happened 2,600 years ago. But if it happened, it could happen again. And so people later on, 600 years later, said it happened to Jesus. People said it happened 200 years ago to Joseph Smith. When people have these things happen, you got to say, well, wait, it happened to Ezekiel. If it happened, if it's a vision, if somebody would say, yeah, but it didn't really happen to Ezekiel, it didn't literally eat a scroll, then, you could say, you could have a dream that this is happening, and it'd be pretty amazing if you did, and it was really God. And by the way, tomorrow night on a Wednesday night class, we're going to discuss what happens specifically if a prophet comes and tells you certain things, how you know whether the prophet is lying or not. It's actually in the Bible. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy itself, the Torah itself, actually talks about whether prophets could be doing it. No. I'll show. So if you look at that section, and again, this is in the Bible, so this is where we get into
It didn't matter to Ezekiel whether it was a dream or reality, because he reacted as if it was real.
there's no question. For Ezekiel, it's real, but for us reading it, if Ezekiel goes through this experience and actually, if he does this kind of stuff, then it begs the question, can it happen to you and I?
This is 1,500 years after Moses.
No, 600 years after Moses.
600 years after Moses. So God has been trying since Moses through various prophets to after Noah, right?
Yeah.
And right, going back to the big three. And so now this makes sense to me, right? Of why he picked Ezekiel. Well, I don't know why he picked Ezekiel, but he picked a mortal. Okay, no, this I guess Moses, they're all why he instructing him. But he instructed. Well, I guess what he showed himself in this manner. Let's put it that. Let me go down. Let me refine it even more, because he wasn't having any success with the other prophets. So he's trying another. It's like dealing with your children. You're trying to corral the cats here, right? And then is that right? And so now he's saying, okay, I can't do it through these other prophets. So I'm showing you this is me.
People keep rebelling.
But
Yeah.
But my point is, he's sorry to take everybody's time up, but he's saying, I want, okay, now I can see how it's crazy. Because he's right, he's saying, I don't even know how to word it. He's saying, as a mortal person, right? Right, we haven't heard those words before, have we? As a mortal person, right, I want you to spread the word,
Yeah,
corral the cats.
yeah. And that's why I said this is probably the best description of what a prophet does that we get, which is that you're a mortal. And they probably won't listen to you either, but at least you're a mortal. And again, he's not the first, but it's the first time that we've really had this description of it where God is telling the person, well, at least you're like them. And that's why what's so interesting about this, in the midst of this very mystical and one of the, I mean, it is really the most descriptive moments we have in the Bible of God, right? We have a little bit in Exodus where Moses wants to see God on the mountain and God goes past and it's not really a description because God says, I can't let you see me. We have Isaiah with the throne and seeing the angels. And then we get this, which is a chapter. This is the biggest description of God. In the midst of that, we literally come back to earth by God telling, she's telling him right here, he's telling Ezekiel, it doesn't really matter what I look like because they don't listen to me anyways. So what's so interesting is right after we have a description of God,
How did that come down and then
what difference does it make what I look like? They don't listen to me. They don't listen to me. They haven't listened to me for 600 years since I appeared to them at Mount Sinai. And everybody saw it. Everybody saw the lightning. Everybody saw this stuff. They don't listen.
But foreigners will listen.
Maybe.
It's the how, well, it says so.
Why?
Verse 7.
Says.
Well, actually, back up to 6. Not so many peoples of foreign speech in a hard language whose words you cannot understand. Surely if I sent you to such, they would listen to you. But the house of Israel will not listen.
Oh,
to
yeah.
you.
So
chapter 2?
It says that they have three.
yeah. You're
No,
no, Reverend Lynn. That is a real important part of this, which is that yes, we're especially should be good at listening, and we're not. But let me just show you this. This is Deuteronomy, because you asked this. Let me show it to you. When you enter the land that your God is giving you, you shall not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations. Let none be found among you who consigns a son or daughter to the fire, who is an augur, a soothsayer, diviner, or sorcerer, one who casts spells, one who consults ghosts. Those are all the things you're not supposed to do. Don't do those things, right? Don't worship God in those ways. Don't do magic. Don't do those kind of things. Don't offer your kids up on an altar. For anyone who does those things is abhorrent to God, and you must be wholehearted to God, right? Those nations that you are about to dispossess, they do those things. Don't do those things. And here it says right here, from among your own people, your God, Adonai, will raise up for you a prophet like myself, that is whom you shall heed. This is what Moses is telling the people. This is just what you asked of God at Mount Sinai, right? At Horeb, on the day of the assembly. He says, I don't want to hear God, right? Don't let us see it. We told, remember, you guys told me, you don't want to see God. Whereupon Adonai said to me, they have done well in speaking thus. I will raise up from among them, their own people, a prophet like yourself, in whose mouth I will put my words and who will speak all that I command. And anybody who fails to hear the word of the prophet, right, I will call him into account. But any prophet, right? So you got to listen to the prophets that I send, right? But any prophet who presumes to speak in my name an oracle that I did not command to be uttered, or who speaks in the name of another God, right? Or gods, that prophet shall surely die, right?
They didn't know who. They didn't know who to trust.
Well, I'm getting to that. And you shall ask yourself, how can we know? If that prophet speaks in the name of Adonai and the oracle does not come true, the oracle was not spoken by Adonai. That prophet has uttered it presumptuously. Do not stand in dread of that person. How do you know? What he says happens. That he's God, that he's speaking on behalf of God. But also know because he's not supposed to be speaking in the name of other gods. So there's a couple things that the prophet has to do. They have to be speaking in my name. They have to not be speaking on behalf of another God. And what they have to say has to happen. So we haven't gotten to Ezekiel yet telling the people what's going to happen. Jeremiah did, and it happened. Isaiah did, and it happened. In Isaiah's case, he actually makes things happen like the sundial turning backwards. He actually makes things happen for the people in there, like right in front of them. But that's very rare. By the time we get to this point, God isn't doing miracles in front of people. God's not proving anymore. The prophets have to say something, and then it happens, right? And they said, there's going to be an earthquake next week, and then it happened. So whatever it is that they say, and then it happens, that's when you believe them. So that's what they have to do. The prophets have to speak of what will happen, and then it has to happen. So the question is, did that happen with Jesus, by the way? Did it happen with Jesus? That's an interesting question. Now, it's not necessarily our question. It's not a question I have to ask, but this is the key thing. There definitely was a belief by Christians, by early Christians, that what Jesus said would happen, did happen, which is that there was a feeling that Jesus prophesied that the temple would be destroyed. It was destroyed. Now, why didn't everyone then believe Jesus was a prophet after that happened? There's a problem. There were about 4 million people walking around saying the temple is going to be destroyed. If he had been the only person who had said it, then people might have said, wow, that guy really knows his stuff. God's really speaking to him. The problem is that wasn't enough of a prophecy by itself to be fulfilled for people to say, well, Jesus said that was what was going to happen. So from the prophetic angle, it didn't happen. It didn't happen in a way that would have convinced people enough that he did, because so many people said it. The other thing is, he didn't actually spend a lot of time talking about the temple being destroyed. That wasn't really his thing. For whatever reason, again, it could be that, like, that's not my point. The other problem is, he might not have, and this is where people go, but like, you want to say, like, we as Jews, we want to say Jesus was a prophet. I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not sure that he even intended to be a prophet. The idea that that's our kind of well, let's all agree that Jesus was a prophet, right? That's where we're all going to kind of have this kind of what's the word I'm looking for? We're all going to come to an agreement on this point. The problem is, it doesn't appear that Jesus spent a lot of time doing that. It seems like his mission was to be more of a teacher and to be more of a rabbi, to be more of that type of to have that approach, not to rely on prophecies coming about and therefore saying, and that's why you should listen to me. Because he's speaking, for the most part, his teachings are based on the Bible, and he's basically teaching people, this is why you should be doing what you're doing, because you know it, because God told you it already, which means he's really functioning more as a rabbi. So this idea that he's a prophet, or that we should accept Jesus as a prophet, I don't know that Jesus wanted to be a prophet. I don't know if that's what even the context of what he was doing was a prophet. So if I say, oh yeah, okay, he's a prophet, I don't know that that's what he did, because he didn't do a lot of prophecy. It's not what the majority of his teachings are. They're not prophecies. There's very little in there that is prophecy. And it's not, and again, one of the things that you're seeing as you're reading Isaiah and you're reading Jeremiah, and now we're reading Ezekiel, there aren't a lot of parts of Jesus' text where he's saying, and it shall come to pass that this is what's going to be. Because even when he says this is the way it should be, he's not saying,
He's not prophesying.
he's not saying it's prophecy. Because what he's really trying to tell people is, this is the world that you're supposed to create. This is the world, this is the world that God, this is the world that God wanted you to have. And from that standpoint, one doesn't have to be a prophet to say that, because it's not this event is going to happen, and therefore, that's how we'll know that what Jesus said was a prophecy. So, one of the, so for example, to me, one of the most powerful parts of the Christian Bible, and we discussed this even when I was in Israel with some of you in February, the most famous part is Jesus, is the Sermon on the Mount, right? when he gives the Beatitudes and says, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Blessed are those, who are persecuted. This isn't in the future, this is what God will, at a certain point, this will be there. I mean, he literally, that's not what he's saying. There's no prophecy here. These are his explanations of the Torah. That's what this is. This isn't a prophecy. This is teaching. This is a midrash. This is a explanation of the text.
Was he considered a rabbi?
I believe he was.
People called him rabbi.
I believe that the purpose of what he was doing was to teach from that standpoint.
Interesting, because the church teaches that John the Baptizer was the last prophet, and yet I don't see him prophesying much. Do you?
Nope.
No.
No, the idea to some extent is that one of the reasons why the church wasn't even concerned about that is because Jesus doesn't need to prophesy, because that's a Jewish issue. That's like a Jewish question. Was he a prophecy? Because if he's God, if he's speaking on behalf of God, then there's no need for it. Like everything before him can be prophecy. John the Baptist can be a prophet, was prophesying that he would be here, but there's no need for prophecy anymore. There's no need for it. It's done. Which Jews had a similar answer, which was, we're not prophesizing anymore. That the era of the prophets is over. It ended 200 years before. That's what would have been the Jewish answer to this. Look, most of the people would have said by the time Ezekiel is done, there's no need for any more prophets. And again, we're going to read other prophets. We haven't read the minor prophets. And they're not minor because they're not important. They're just not very long. Those books of prophecies come before Ezekiel. Ezekiel, to some extent, is one of the last prophets. There's like 3 more prophets chronologically that came after Ezekiel. But Ezekiel was already a late prophet. He's already one of the late prophets. And it's not until his time that we almost get this idea, which is, why God's been sending prophets all this time? Because you don't listen to God. Maybe you'll listen to a person. So again, Jesus kind of turned that around, which is, no, this is God now speaking to you as a person. And that to me was, you can also say that maybe some early followers of Jesus would have said this, is that it's not enough for you to hear a prophet anymore. You need to hear God say it. And therefore, now he's going to say it. It was blasphemy for Jews, but it wasn't blasphemy for people who didn't believe that this could happen. And so, but I think that there probably were Jews, and there seemed to be Jews who said, yeah, we'll accept that now God has come back in the shape of a person, because the prophet stuff isn't working. God speaking to a prophet isn't working anymore. And that's why some people would have said, yeah, okay, I get that. But again, this nature of what a prophet does, what is a prophet supposed to be? That's a critical issue. It's because it's essentially, again, how does prophecy end for us, and how is it explained for Christians? So again, for Muslims, they have a whole different take on it, which is, yeah, Jesus was a prophet. They have no issue saying that. That was their compromise. That's the word I'm looking for, compromise. And that's kind of a silly way of saying it, but it's not really, which is that the Muslims said Jesus was a prophet. He wasn't son of God. He wasn't God, but he was a prophet. So that's the yeah. So
Prophet is more sort of honorific, whereas rabbi is like.
Oh no, but people who are prophets had to know the future. They had to say something that came to pass. That's what Deuteronomy says. They had to be able to they had to be able to prognosticate. They had to be able to do that. And Lord knows, I'm really bad at that. I did so bad this last week at picking the first week of football. So what do you need to know? If somebody had told me that Aaron Rodgers would get knocked out on the first play and the Jets would still win, I would have said no. But it was a great game. It was a fun first Monday Night Football. It was a weird weekend. All right, folks. Thank you, Rosemary, for introducing us to Ezekiel. When we come back next week, we're going to read, and we are going to be here next week, even though it'll be a new year. It'll be a new year. We're going to read the beginning of chapter 3, and we'll be reading about this scroll that he ate and what comes out of that when you get that. But again, Reverend Lynn already gave us a great line, which is, if you go out to the Gentiles, they'll listen to you. They'll listen to you. If I sent you to them, they'd understand. But your own people, they're not going to listen. I love that. I love that lesson. You're not going to be a prophet for your own people. All right, everybody. Happy New Year. And
New Year, everybody.
we don't see you here. We'll see you for Rosh Hashanah. Be good. Be good.